Hi, welcome to a special edition of Education Matters. Today we'll be looking at a topic that has been in New Jersey education for as long as I've been around, going back hundreds of years, the regionalization and consolidation of our districts. There's something interesting going on in the county of Salem County. They're doing a feasibility study to look at the feasibility of a countywide district. With me today, I have two attorneys who are part of that feasibility study. Their firm is doing the feasibility study. I have Vito Gagliardi Jr. Welcome, Vito.
Always good to see you, Ray.
Good to see you too. And Kerri Wright. Welcome, Kerri. Before we get into the framework of all this, Vito, why don't you tell us a little bit about your firm? Because I know people might be surprised. You've done some work on this area too, but why don't you start with tell us who your firm is?
Thanks very much, Ray. So Kerri and I co-chair the education law practice at Porzio Bromberg in Newman, which has 3 offices in New Jersey. Our main office is in Morristown, which is where we are right now. In this particular area, that is school regionalization, deregionalization, we always say reconfiguration, so it's as broad a description as possible. I think we've done more of these studies than anyone in the state. We typically work with educational, financial and demographics professionals, so we can cover all of the issues that by statute and regulation are important to the Department of Education and ultimately important to the communities we serve. We have handled the only school dissolutions in state history where regional districts were dissolved, and we put together the last regional school district in the state, which is the K-12 district serving 3 communities in South Hunterdon in Hunterdon County. We've been involved with a lot of sending receiving disputes, a lot of internal reconfigurations. But with those school regionalizations, when you take apart a limited purpose regional school district, you have to put something together. You're creating K-12s, maybe other regional districts. We've defended legal issues successfully up to the Supreme Court and back again. I'm assuming that that background is what led us to be fortunate enough to be hired in Salem County, because with a project of that scope, we're going to run into a whole host of issues, but unlikely too many that we haven't already seen. Kerri also serves on a local school district, which sends its high schoolers into a regional district. So she has practical experience that I don't. But I think with our team of professionals, we have a lot to offer Salem County, and it's an extraordinarily interesting project.
It is an interesting project, and you stole my thunder to say that Kerri also serves on a local board of education. So Kerri, what's the scope of this project, the time frame, and who are your clients for those who are unaware?
Sure, thanks, Ray. Our clients, for anyone who's not already aware, are the county freeholders. So the county freeholders issued an RFP, and through a grant from the state are authorized to pursue this study. So we are writing the study for the county freeholders. However, we can't do it without the cooperation of all of the districts in Salem County. And the experts that Vito mentioned that we're working with have already been in touch with, I think, all of the districts in Salem County to get their cooperation, get their feedback, get some information from them. But the general scope of the study is to look at the potential for a countywide consolidation of all of the districts. One of the things we're also looking at as an option that was suggested by the county freeholders would be the consolidation of the high school districts. So consolidation 9-12 of all of the communities in Salem County, which typically tends to be much more feasible. Kids are more willing, and families are more willing to have their children travel for high school than for elementary school. So that's another option that we're looking at as well. But it includes all of the districts in Salem County. It's quite a massive project.
Vito, you talked about it before. Most of the regionalization studies that I've seen have been, around the regional high school, making it go from a limited purpose 7-12 or 9-12 to a K-12, or the sending, receiving, merging together. This is a lot bigger in scope because there's a lot more districts involved. Does that bring any new challenges with it?
The number of districts isn't necessarily the source of the biggest challenge. I mean, there are 14 public school districts in Salem County, although the scope of the study, they want us to look at charter schools and the VOTEC school as well in terms of how they might fit into a region. But when we did Lower Camden County Regional, which was one of the limited purpose, we dissolved and created new K-12s. There were 7 communities served by Lower Camden County Regional. So there were literally 8 districts we were addressing. This is a little more than 20 years ago. So those were 8 districts, here are 14 districts. So not that complicated in terms of the number of districts. Yes, more employees, collective bargaining agreements. The real challenge, the real new aspect is to see how charter schools or a county-run VOTEC school might fit into the mix of one or more regional districts. And that's something that, to our knowledge, has never been explored in any county at any time.
I don't think, in my experience, it hasn't. But a little follow-up to that, there's a lot of, I've looked at this issue many times, and there's a lot of statutes and laws that are obstacles to the regionalization of districts. Will you at least be identifying the laws and say, well, this is going to be an outcome?
So that's one of the great things about New Jersey, right? We've been talking about trying to create more regional school districts for almost as long as I've been alive. And yet the law has been modified in many cases to make it more complicated to regionalize school districts in an effort to protect the rights of property owners, of course, certainly to protect the rights of employees. So hugely complicated. And when you get down to local issues, and we've literally looked at these for districts from High Point, that is Montague, down to Cape May. The city of Cape May is served by a regional school district for its high schools. You'll find these odd local twists in terms of rights they have, grants they have. In Cape May Regional, there's a Coast Guard station that provides more students for a local small district down there than the residents. So there's always going to be a twist. New Jersey is a small state, but there's an awful lot going on. The one thing we know right now is that if we were going to involve charter schools or the VOTEC school in any regional aspect of our report, those would need legislation in order to make them happen. There's nothing that permits that. So other things are complicated, but possible based upon existing statutes and regulations. Those other 2 elements, charter schools and county-run VOTEC schools, there's nothing that currently exists in the law to involve them in a regional process.
What about the governance structure of a countywide district? That would have to be something that would have to be addressed too, I would imagine.
Certainly, if you're going to involve charter schools and a county-run school, absolutely has to be addressed with legislation. If you're not going to involve them, the law as it currently exists is useful. I don't know that it's going to be satisfying to the citizens in Salem County. We'll have to see, because one of the things we might be recommending is one or more regions as opposed to countywide. We've not had our hands tied in terms of what the recommendations would be. To my knowledge, the district in the state with the largest number of constituents is the limited purpose regional school district, North Hunterdon and Voorhees. And there are 13 communities served by that. So they have some complicated Rubik's Cube style formula in terms of one person votes, but it counts as 1.2 votes or something like that in order to make sure that people have a meaningful opportunity to be represented. So we may rely on precedent like that if we have a particularly large region that we're recommending. But otherwise, the law is adequate to permit the citizens to be represented in a regional school district consisting of public school districts down there.
Vito's right about that, right? If I can just add, there is a specific statute, which I think North Hunterdon and Voorhees utilized, that permits the creation of a new regional school district and permits you to petition the commissioner for an alternate setup for your governance structure. So an alternate selection rather than the one that's specific in the regionalization statute. It says basically it's based on the census. So if there is a procedure that we think would work better for Salem County, we have the statutory ability to request that from the commissioner. So that's already in the law.
Just a quick follow-up to that, and I'm familiar with North Hunterdon. I don't know if there's any other setup like that, but as you move forward in regionalization studies, there's usually has to be a vote. Will there still have to be a vote, I guess, countywide or by community somehow? Kerri?
Yes. Yeah. So there is no setup in the law where a regional school district is created without a vote of the people. So I think that's really important for those living in Salem County who may be interested in this to understand that this will be voted on by the voters in each of the communities. And the current state of the law provides that to form a regional school district, it requires an affirmative vote of a majority of the voters in each of the municipalities. So that's a really important point, because that means that you can't be forced into a regional school district against the will of the voters in your specific community. It provides really veto power for each district.
And just to follow up, Kerri, one of the things, and Vito kind of alluded to it before, is the merging of contracts, teacher contracts. And now you have a lot of contracts in the countywide district. If it's a new district, do you merge? Usually you take the largest district with the staff. How would you look at it if it's countywide?
That's just going to be a much larger undertaking, but the process is still the same. So when you have a new district, assuming you were to dissolve all the current districts and create a brand new school district, the contracts start over. But lots of people panic. Well, what do we do in the interim, right? So in the interim, the unit or the district with the most number of members, that contract will continue. So they'll still have their rights. It's very protected by statute. They have the rights per the contract. And then you negotiate a new contract. Sometimes it does take a little while. I specifically helped South Hunterdon to negotiate their new contract, and they had 4 collective bargaining agreements that were dissolved, and we had to start from scratch. So the board puts together its proposal and the union puts together its proposal. It'll be a little bit more cumbersome, maybe a little unwieldy, because you're going to have sort of the sacred cows, so to speak, in each of the contracts that folks will want to see in the final contract. But it certainly is doable. You come to the bargaining table, same as you would in any contract negotiation. This one just will take a little bit longer.
Yeah. Vito, one of the other things, if you have a large district like this, a countywide district, I think some of the parents may want to know, well, where do I send my kids to school? Do I have a choice? Can I have a choice among the high schools, or do I keep the same elementary school I have? So is that something that has to be looked at too?
I don't know that that would be necessarily part of the study, because it would be up to the new Board of Education in a regional district to decide how it wants to handle such requests. But, you know, I always look at these, and again, when you're talking about changing an educational structure, right, something near and dear to a community's heart, how are its children educated? How are its tax dollars spent? So this is an issue that goes to the heart, right, other than the security and concerns that exist in people's lives based upon the current pandemic. It's hard to imagine a public issue of more significance than how children are educated and how tax dollars are spent. At the end of the day, though, as Kerri pointed out, whatever happens in terms of reconfiguring the districts, the voters make that decision. The purest form of democracy possible. Here's what exists. You have independent experts telling you, here's what you could do and here's what it might look like. And the voters decide if that's what they want, and they also decide how to fund it. Once that new district is created, at the very instant it's created, the new Board of Education is named by the county superintendent, typically from the existing boards of education. They're not looking to reinvent the wheel or disenfranchise anybody. And then people vote on their elected representatives. So the decisions made by that Board of Education, the very existence of that Board of Education, is decided by a majority of the voters. Once that Board of Education exists, it's like any other school district. So if you're in a large district, you're sent to your quote unquote neighborhood school, but typically there are mechanisms in place to provide for options based upon children's special needs, keeping siblings together, the issues posed by the unique circumstance of the family in which the children lived. I would expect that to be no different here. But if this new school district or districts wants to create policies to give certainty to parents, it will be free to do that. Otherwise, it's like any other school district that runs a number of schools.
When you go to the vote, as Vito was alluding to, Kerri, a lot of times it does come down to dollars and cents. And I guess one of the things that you have to look at was the property tax impact, because I know particularly people who don't have kids in school, but all citizens want to look at that. Is that something that will be studied?
Absolutely. A large portion of the study is going to be the financial impact. They're going to, our experts are going to look at things like the debt burden, who has debt, which districts have debt, which districts don't have debt, because that goes all into this calculation, right? Who has assets, who has debt, and then what the specific tax impact will be. We assume that that's going to be right up there with the educational impact, right? People want to know that they're going to have still a great educational system. They want to know where their kids are going to be educated, and they want to know how much is this going to cost. Am I going to have to see a significant increase in the cost? Am I going to be paying for my neighbors now that I'm part of a larger school district, which includes other communities? So that absolutely will be part of the study. Typically, we look to provide some examples of what it might be on the average home in each community. And typically, we also will provide our recommendation for what the tax levy allocation will be amongst the districts. So the statute, as Vito alluded to, the current statute for regional school district permits you to fund it based on 100% per pupil, how many kids you send to the district, 100% equalized property value, or a combination of the two. And so our experts, along with us, will look at what's the most fair. We know that, as I said a couple of minutes ago, right, every district, every community needs to vote in favor of whatever the ultimate recommendation is in order for it to move forward. So if there are winners and losers, you're never going to move it forward. So our goal is really to find a tax allocation method that will be fair to everyone and will result hopefully in winners to every single district.
Just to follow up to that, Vito, one of the other things that you have to look at when you're regionalizing or deregionalizing a district is the socioeconomic impact, the student body. And is that something that you'll have to address too? I would imagine it would probably be better if you regionalize it in the countywide in terms of more diversity.
You're right about that, and typically that's the case. Obviously, if it's not going to be one countywide district, but more than one based upon what the study shows, you want to make sure that you're not creating unintentionally a segregated effect on one or more of the communities involved. But if you look, and I'm sure you have, whether it's options at regionalization, deregionalization, sending, receiving disputes, whatever, those that are not successful when fought before the commissioner, fought in court, almost always fall on this particular issue. I'm not aware of any that have been fatal in terms of the studies based upon education alone. Sometimes there's a financial issue, but to the extent they're not successful, it's on this issue, on the racial and socioeconomic composition of the district. So it is critical that our study identify those issues and make sure that we're not unintentionally building into our recommendation a structure that, if challenged legally, would not be successful. So even though in all likelihood it's going to be left to the voters, there could be folks who are inclined to a legal challenge. We can't possibly recommend something that we think will fail constitutionally. And so the study will look at that. Certainly that's one of the roles that the lawyers play, right? We're not the demographers here. We're not the educational experts. We're certainly not going to be the ones doing the financial analysis. Heaven forbid if you had lawyers doing the financial analysis, right? But on this issue, making sure that it's successful and not subject to legal challenge, that's a critical part of the issue. And I'm glad you raised it, because ultimately so many of these have a problem when it comes to that type of analysis.
And going from that issue to it seems like a smaller issue, but all these little issues sometimes create big problems down the road. But the transportation is always something that always comes up. Some districts are walking districts and they don't really have any transportation. So I guess that's part of that economic study you're going to be doing, right, Kerri?
Yes, yeah, transportation will be part of that. Certainly we're not going to be plotting out new transportation routes, because that's going to be up to the new district and the board in place. But we will be looking at mostly the added costs or the practical implications of changing the structure and how that will impact transportation. So that will definitely be a part of the study.
And is there anything else that as we'll be moving forward, anything else people should know, particularly if you live in Salem County?
Well, from my perspective, I think it's most important to understand that even though so much of the media coverage has been about, quote unquote, the creation of a countywide school district, we have not been handcuffed in any way. We've not been given any marching orders other than to analyze what we think is best for the citizens and the students of Salem County and the educational professionals who serve those students. So we are free to come back and say, nothing works. We've looked at this, from every which way, and nothing works. And we did look, if you can imagine this, Ray, at a situation in Bergen County where there were 4 communities, each had a K-8 district and a limited purpose regional school district. One of the things we looked at was turning 5 school districts into 1. You would say, well, the savings there would be great. They would have been. But based upon the formula, as Kerri described it, any combination of equalized property value and per pupil, there was no way to take the millions in savings and make sure that every community saved money. So as you tinkered with it, there were going to be 3 winners and 1 loser. And if you tried to help out the one that wasn't going to be better off financially, one of the others dropped below where they were, and all of a sudden they were going to be paying more. So we're free to come back and say nothing works. We're free to come back and offer multiple options in terms of regionalizations, or we're free to say countywide district would work great in Salem County based upon its size and population, and here's what it would look like. So from my standpoint, the most important thing is, despite the coverage of this, hey, the county's creating a countywide school district, I don't know what Salem County is going to do, but I'm flattered that they've turned to us and a group of talented professionals to for us to tell them what we think would work, and conversely, what might not work.
And if there's a situation, and I'm just throwing this out here, and where there's maybe 1 or 2 districts that it's kind of a loss, there is the possibility that maybe you could have legislation to help those districts for 5 years, say, okay, that's, maybe you lay that out and say, look, these are the 2 districts that might be hurt financially, because a lot of times it does come down to dollars and cents.
Well, the Senate president, as you know, has been very interested in this particular project. Both, when I say this particular, I mean the idea of reducing the number of school districts and therefore saving taxpayers' monies, as well as, of course, Senator Sweeney interested in what goes on in Salem County. So my expectation is, if we needed legislation to help, a few communities transition to a different structure, that we would have a very willing participant in such discussions in the form of Senator Sweeney.
Okay, so what's the next step that our viewers can hold their breath and say, okay, this is when I can get involved at the end of the next month?
So the RFP provided a 90-day time frame for the completion of the study, which we indicated we'd be able to adhere to so long as the travel restrictions from COVID didn't interfere with schools being closed. It's a little bit more difficult to get down there. And so long as we can get the documents and data that we need from the different school districts in Salem County. But we are still working on that 90-day window. So probably February is a time frame that we'll have a report for the county freeholders.
Oh,
and we expect that they will make it public right away.
I look forward to reading that report. I'll be one of the first ones to read it. Any other final words that maybe I didn't cover, Vito or Kerri?
I don't think so, Ray. I think you covered everything. Very nice.
I think you've been thorough as always, Ray. It's always a pleasure to work with you.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? This is not the first time I've talked to you about regionalization or deregionalization. It's every 2 or 3 years it comes up in every district. So across the state. So I'd like to thank Vito Gagliardi and Kerri Wright for joining me about the feasibility study in Salem County. I think you'll find this interesting. Even if you don't live in Salem County, there's other rural counties. So that brings us to the end of this Education Matters.